Hello everyone and Happy New Year. I am here today to film my reading wrap-up for 2021. It's been a few years, I think, since I have done one of these, so I'm out of practice, but I'm just gonna share with you guys some of my reading statistics as well as my favorite books. So let's dive into it. So last year I ended up reading 40 books, which was more than 2019 and 2020 combined. I haven't read that much in quite a while, so it felt pretty good, and most of the books that I read were actually really good because they focused on quality over quantity, and I was blessed with a lot of really great books this past year. I did start using Storygraph last year, which is far better than Goodreads. I will leave my username down below, so feel free to add me as a friend if you like. But I love this app. They have statistics and infographics you can look at for your reading for any time period, the year, the month, whatever, and it's great. So I'm going to be sharing some of those graphs and things in this video. For some reason, it's saying I only read 39 books in Goodreads, which I'm also still using, says 40, so I need to figure out which book I'm missing. So in the graphics, you'll see 39, but I did actually read 40. So last year I ended up reading 18,619 pages. I read quite a few big books. I read a variety of different moods during 2021 because in Storygraph you can kind of put the mood of the book that you're reading. By far the biggest chunk of this was adventurous books, which makes sense since I read a lot of fantasy. Dark, emotional, and mysterious were the next three biggest chunks, which isn't shocking because I read a lot of Robin Hobb, and her books are all of those things. In terms of pace, 46% were fast, and then the remaining was an even split between slow and medium. In terms of page number, most of the books that I did read were between 300 and 500 pages. The next biggest chunk was 500 plus, because I did read quite a few books that were almost 1,000 pages, and then the smaller remaining amount of 5% were less than 300. I did read a few nonfiction books last year, so most of my reading was 92% fiction, but I did have 8% of nonfiction. In terms of genre, of course, by far the biggest genre is fantasy. I'm a big fantasy reader. Next would be historical, then middle grade, young adult, self-help, psychology, romance, literary, and one horror book. In terms of format, 92% of my books were print format, though I did read a few Kindle books, as you can see from this chart. 8% were digital. In terms of my most read authors, number one was Juliette Marillier this past year, second was Jeff Wheeler, which makes sense since he releases like 4 books a year, then Sebastian de Castell. So those were my top 3. Surprisingly this year, Robin Hobb did not make the top of the list because I only read 2 of her books as rereads. This chart here kind of shows the books and pages read on each month. As you can see, the last half of the year I did a lot better in terms of my reading. I started to get really into reading again, which has been really nice. And then in terms of star rating, my average rating for this year was 3.98 stars, so almost 4-star reads, which is pretty consistent with how I feel my reading went this year. I read a lot of really good books. I had quite a few 5-star reads. As you can see, I had 8 of those, so it was a good reading year, and I am hoping that 2022 will be just as good. So that's kind of my rundown of my reading statistics. I'm not going to show you all 40 books that I read, but I will give you guys a highlight of some of my favorite books. So the first one that I want to highlight is The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the second book in her Daevabad trilogy. I love this trilogy. I reread the first book and then read the last 2 this year, but this one was my favorite in the trilogy. I really loved that it took place in like Africa, Egypt, India, like that whole area, and you don't get a lot of fantasy based on like Muslim traditions and Middle Eastern traditions, so it was kind of cool seeing that mythology and just reading these characters, and it made for some really great summer reads, and I definitely recommend this trilogy if you haven't checked it out already. It's pretty fast-paced, and I love the characters. Like Nari is probably one of my favorite characters now. She's great, and so is Ollie. So I definitely recommend checking out the series. It's really a lot of fun. The next book is from one of my new favorite trilogies, and again, book 2 was my favorite, and this is the Tide Child trilogy by R.J. Barker. This is book 2, which is Call of the Bone Ships, and it was my favorite in the trilogy. This series is a lot of fun. It is a very unique fantasy world. They have taken like the seafaring fantasy trope and made it into something new, so some of the nautical terms have been shifted. It's more common for women to be captains, and in this society, women are more revered than the men. And it's just a very interesting societal structure in this book anyway, the way that they have the different tiers of society. You have the woman who rules everybody. It's almost always a female ruler, and then, you know, they have like these women who are just made to basically kind of procreate and rule, and then the men who serve them and are there to help them procreate, and then you have like the lower classes. So anybody who's like maimed or injured or somehow born ill in some way is kind of like the lowest levels of society. And then you have these criminals who are sent to the black ships, the black bone ships, and they're forced to serve their sentence basically until they die on these ships. And they're just sent out to do whatever tasks need to be done. And it follows our main character who has been sent to a black ship as punishment for a crime that wasn't necessarily like unwarranted. And then the other interesting things is that their ships are built from the bones of these ancient sea dragons. So there's this mystery of what happened to the sea dragons, and there's a lot of political intrigue and ship battles, and it's just a lot of fun. I definitely recommend checking it out. It moves a little bit slow at first, and then the books keep picking up pace, and just they're dark and they're mysterious, and I love them to bits. And the next book is a Juliette Marillier book, and it is Den of Wolves, which is the third book in the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy. This is probably my favorite trilogy from her now. It's replaced of the Seven Water series, but this book in particular was my favorite. It was a perfect ending to this trilogy. I absolutely loved it. It follows our two characters of Blackthorn and Grimm, who met in a prison and escaped together, and they basically have had to set off to forge their own life together. Blackthorn was rescued by the Fae, so she has to kind of work off a sentence for having received the help from the Fae, this rescue. And then it kind of just shows their life kind of taking off as she kind of solves mysteries and things that are going on in this new area in Ireland that she is residing in with Grimm. And I really, really enjoyed this trilogy a lot, and this book was exceptional, and the ending was perfect, and it was probably, it might actually be my favorite book of the year. I highly recommend it. My next favorite book was also a Juliette Marillier book, and it is a part of the Warrior Bards series. It is the second book. Apparently I have a thing for second books. It is Dance with Fate. This actually takes place in the same like setting as Blackthorn and Grimm novels. It is like the next generation after that. Really, really enjoy it. So I definitely recommend checking it out. I don't want to go too in depth into the description because you could spoil some things from Blackthorn and Grimm. And it is the second book in the series, but just like all of her books, they're dark and they're atmospheric and they're perfect for winter. And I love anything that has to do with Ireland anyway, so I am very obsessed with these books. I just finished the third one and it was also very good, but book 2 is still my favorite. And the next book is Crownbreaker by Sebastian de Castell, the final book in the Spellslinger series. This is his YA fantasy series. It's a lot of fun. It takes place in the same world as The Greatcoats, which I don't know why I didn't realize until I read this book and then realized that they were in the same world and things make more sense. I really, really recommend this one. It's not as dark as his Greatcoat books. It is still pretty funny. The series is actually probably a little bit more humorous than his Greatcoats, and it's just full of a lot of adventures with our main character of Kellen, and I highly recommend it. It's also going to be being adapted into a show, I think, which I'm very excited about. The next book is a middle grade book, and it is The Wondersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend, the second book again in the Nevermore series. So I loved this book. It was so good. I did enjoy book 3, which I also read last year, but this one is my favorite so far, and I can't wait to get book 4 this year. So it continues our trials of our main character of Morrigan Crow as she kind of starts to learn more about her powers and fit into the society that she is now a part of, this world that she is now a part of. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a lot of fun. I love the character of Morrigan. She's fantastic, and I just love everything about the series, and I want book 4 now. And the last 2 books are part of the same duology. I couldn't pick one, so I'm doing both because this whole duology is amazing. It is the Traitor God and then God of Broken Things. I don't actually know if this duology has a name, but these 2 books are amazing, and it's like you just have to read them together because this one picks up like immediately after this one ends, and the ending is fantastic. It is all about this character who has like these powers. There's like these group of people who have magic powers basically, but he has a very rare ability which allows him to influence people's minds, and it's feared, and he was being controlled by like the guild. He ends up escaping for a reason that you find out later. It's kind of integral to the plot, so I'm not going to give it away. But he ends up having to return because things are happening. His best friend dies, which he's linked to him, so he knew that he passed. He needed to go figure out what was happening. And then he finds out all of the gods disappeared, which seems suspicious. So basically all hell breaks loose in this society, and he becomes a part of it, and it is so good. I love, it was a new twist on like the gods influencing people trope, and I loved everything about it. It's dark, they were humorous, he's kind of like a morally gray character, but you can't help but rooting for him. And it's just a really unique, fresh fantasy, and I highly recommend it if you haven't read it already. All right, that is it for my 2021 reading wrap up. I would love to hear how your reading year went. If you have read any of these books, just anything you want to throw down in the comments, feel free to do so, and we will chat down there. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.